This week of college football has been absolutely insane. There have been huge upsets like Northern Illinois over Notre Dame. There have been extremely close games like Arkansas and Oklahoma State going into overtime, Kansas State and Tulane taking it down to the wire, and even just some lower level games like Cal upsetting Auburn. Neither of those teams are making the playoff, but it's still crazy to talk about. And for me, I really love coming up with my top 25 power rankings. It's something that I just like to do for fun. And so I figured I'd talk about my new top 25 because it's changed pretty drastically from what it was. So let's just get right into it. So my power rankings are a little bit unique from what you'll normally see from like the AP poll or from ESPN or, your normal media outlets. My ranking is all about the ability for a team to make the playoff. And the way this playoff is formatted, it really benefits teams that can manage to win their conference. So you're going to see a lot of schools that are maybe higher up on this list than they actually should be just because they're in a weaker conference. But that's kind of the name of the game. There are going to be some teams that get ranked higher because they have a more favorable schedule. And there are going to be teams that get ranked lower because they have a tougher schedule. So with that in mind, let's start off with our honorable mention, Syracuse. Syracuse actually played a really good game against Georgia Tech. It was down to the wire. It was a top 25 matchup. But let's be real, Georgia Tech wasn't really a top 25 caliber team. They just had a really good win over Florida State a couple weeks ago. It was still a very high quality win for Syracuse. Kyle McCord played well, came from Ohio State, obviously has a lot of talent there. This team kind of has a little bit of an upside, so I would not be surprised if they're kind of in the mix to make the ACC championship down the road. But for now, I'm keeping them out of my top 25. Next up, we have Memphis. Now, Memphis, they've played kind of a couple easy games. They rolled over Troy this past week. They beat some FCS team the week before. I can't remember. But what I'm more excited for is their matchup next week against Florida State. Just imagine if they go to Florida State and win, which they very much could because Memphis is kind of one of those teams in the group of five that people are talking about, oh, they could be the one that makes the playoff. They're kind of in the mix for it. They have the potential to win that game. And then Florida State goes from, fifth in the country last year, going into the Orange Bowl, to then losing 4 straight games and starting the season 0-3, that would be absolutely insane. DJU straight to McDonald's after that game if Memphis won. So I have them at 25. Right now, they're not really a playoff contender, but who knows? Maybe down the road they could be. Next up, I have UNLV. So this is kind of a couple factors. They had a really good game against Houston week 1, and then absolutely steamrolled Utah Tech this past week. I think it was like 77-0. So they're looking really strong, and they're kind of in the talks of being towards the top of the Mountain West. But I think now with Boise State losing to Oregon, even if it was a closer loss, UNLV kind of has the upper hand now. They're still undefeated. They definitely have not the easiest schedule, especially for a group of 5 team, but it's still manageable. They don't play any top 25 opponents. I do believe they play Oregon State. They obviously play Boise State. So they still have some high caliber teams that they'll need to get past. But right now they're rocking and rolling. Next up, I have Boston College. Obviously, week 1, the joke of the season so far is just absolutely ending DJU's career. Boston College looked good. Bill O'Brien is their new head coach. Obviously, Bill O'Brien maybe didn't look all that good in the NFL. But right now, as the head coach at Boston College, they're looking pretty good. And the ACC is wide open, so they're another team that would not be a surprise if they somehow manage to find themselves in the playoff contention down the road, looking for a championship appearance in the ACC. Going into next week, they have a bye week, which is good for them because following that, they play Missouri. I love it when a smaller school has that bye week to then prepare for this huge game, this defining moment for the season. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I'm going to keep my eye on this game and see if Boston College can play David against Goliath for the second time in a row. All right, Iowa State. They're 2-0, and they just beat top 25 rival Iowa on the road with a really strong second half. Iowa obviously has an amazing defense, but they gave up 20 points in the second half alone. which is all Iowa State needed to win. Now, I still have a few other Big 12 teams that I have ahead of Iowa State, but I think that they've made a name for themselves enough early in the season to kind of be in the mix now. All right, so week 1, Clemson, absolutely terrible. Dog water, looked terrible against Georgia. Maybe that's less of how bad Clemson is and more of how good Georgia is, because Clemson absolutely steamrolled App State this past week. They were winning 35-0 after the first quarter alone. So after that, it was really just a scrimmage match. It wasn't even close. And App State, they were supposed to be decent. Obviously, they're group of 5, but they're normally one of the best group of 5 teams out there. And so with Clemson doing that to a team that has that much respect, they might be back. They might have just been pissed off so much from all the hate that they were getting. Every headline I was seeing was Dabo Swinney's washed. He should have gotten transfers. This team sucks. And then they go and they play a respectable team like App State that a lot of people are saying, oh, maybe App State makes the upset. And they silence all the haters. I was one of them. I'm not a fan of Clemson. I was preying on their downfall, and they proved me wrong. And honestly, I have a lot of respect for that. Now they have a bye week, and then they play NC State. That's my team. Go Pack. I'm a little bit scared because we didn't look that good this past week, and Clemson is coming off of a bye playing us. So that game, we're going to see really how good Clemson is, because NC State, they have a good defense. They have an experienced offense. That's going to be Clemson's first game against a solid opponent that's not so overpowered like Georgia. That's your top 25 caliber team. I know NC State's not top 25, but they have the potential to be. And we're going to see how good Clemson is after that game. So we'll just wait and see about that. I'm not going to make a prediction because I obviously have a lot of bias in that game, but that will define Clemson's season for the rest of the year. Next up, we have Nebraska. Nebraska, I'm not going to lie, I've kind of been a doubter. I don't really know why. I guess I'm not really a big fan of Matt Rule. I'm from North Carolina. I don't love the Panthers, but I always cheer for them if they're not playing the Chargers. But yeah, I wasn't a fan of him at the Panthers. I didn't think they was going to be good back at Nebraska. Nebraska always seems like they're going to come back and then don't. But they just absolutely destroyed Colorado and gave them the absolute business. So now I'm kind of like, yo, this team might be legit. But you got to remember, it's Colorado. Colorado's always about the hype, and they never amount to anything with it. So it's a quality win, but how high quality, I'm not really sure. So with that being said, I think there's still a lot of Big Ten teams ahead of Nebraska, but I think that they've earned their respect enough to at least be top 20. Oklahoma just scored 2 touchdowns against one of the worst Power 5 teams in the country with Houston. That's pretty bad. That's not a good sign, because Oklahoma has a really tough schedule this year, and that was supposed to be one of their easy wins, and they didn't make it look easy at all. Defense looked really solid. They forced a safety at the end, but not being able to get any points on the board in the second half for their offense is not a good sign. So we'll just see, because they play a lot of tough games being in the SEC now. So I don't have a super whole lot of confidence in them making a push for the playoff. Now with Arizona, all I heard about them was their offense and how amazing it was going to be. Noah Fafita, he's the future of the program. He's going to turn this whole entire school around and make things amazing and keep up the momentum from last year. But this past week, against an FCS opponent, Northern Arizona, Noah Fafita went for 173 yards passing, 1 touchdown, and 1 pick. Now maybe Northern Arizona is top 25 in the FCS. Maybe they're, kind of in the mix with Montana and North Dakota and all those schools. No, they're not. They're just kind of a mid FCS school that gave them the works and were hanging out until the end. So for Arizona to kind of struggle offensively against an FCS opponent kind of makes me wonder, how good is this offense really? And their defense played well, but their defense isn't really supposed to be the centerpiece of their team this year. So I don't know. I'm a little bit iffy on them right now, but we'll just have to wait and see. It seems like people still believe in them. So, maybe I'm listening to the crowds right now, but I guess I'll keep them up at 18, but I don't really see them making the playoff this year. Next up, we have Michigan. I still want to keep them top 25. Obviously, they lost to Texas by a lot. It's Texas, man. That's one of the best teams that they've had in a while. So their offense looked pretty bad, about as bad as you could predict. But their defense couldn't do anything against Texas either. And their defense is supposed to still be top notch. Like, obviously, they lost a lot of talent on offense. Their defense was supposed to be just as deep this year as it was last year. And that didn't show on the field. So I have them drop down to 17. They're going to have to lock in. They have a couple more really tough games. They play Ohio State. They play Oregon this year. So they'll have to step up in those games if they really want to make the playoff. Next up, we have K-State. They squeaked out a win against Tulane. It was really close. I watched the very end of it. But we got to remember, Tulane, they're not a half-bad team. It was an away game. So it doesn't surprise me that they gave them some trouble early in the season. I feel like these sort of things happen all the time where a smaller school will give a higher ranked team some issues early on in the season when, there's still growing pains and stuff. And to look at the upside of things, Avery Johnson still looked really good. He was throwing it really well, especially in the second half. The first half didn't look too great. But second half, they really turned it on. But their pass defense was kind of struggling a lot, but Tulane's quarterback was pretty good. So we'll see. I think that they'll still be in the mix to maybe make an appearance in the Big 12 championship game. We'll just have to wait and see on that. Next up, we have Oklahoma State. They're another top-notch Big 12 team that took it down to the wire with an inferior opponent, with Arkansas. They went into overtime with them. It was a home game. But we got to remember, Arkansas, even if they're bottom half of the SEC, they're still SEC. Like, they're still used to those big games. There's still a very talented roster. Even if they're only going to end up going like 6-6 or 7-5, there's still no pushover team. So this is another game where I'm like, okay, all you need to do is win that game and you're fine. Just survive in advance. That was kind of the goal for Oklahoma State, and they were able to do that. So I think that they are still kind of in the mix there to get one of those last spots in the playoff. But they're not quite there yet. I think that there's still one more team in the Big 12 that is ahead of them. All right, other than Miami, Louisville is one of the only other ACC teams that hasn't looked bad this year. But they've only had 2 cupcake games. We don't really know how good they are. So after a bye week, they'll play Georgia Tech, and that should actually show if they're for real. All right, at 13, just missing the playoff, we have Missouri. I know Missouri in the AP poll is number 6. I think that's pretty high. I think people are getting a little bit too hyped up on them. Missouri's a good team. They have a favorable schedule, but I'm still not fully invested because these first 2 weeks, they've played 2 cupcake games. They're kind of just rising in the polls because other teams are playing bad, not because they're playing great. So I think it's still going to take a little bit of time before we realize how good Missouri actually is. They have a matchup with Boston College next, like I was talking about. So I guess they have a bye week too. But either way, that should give us a better idea of how good Missouri is and if they really do deserve that last spot in the playoff, because they're in the SEC. There's a lot of schools that could make a strong case to make the playoff this year. So I'm not super high on them right now. But I still have them at 13. I still think that they're a great program. I think that they're a good team that could definitely be in the mix. But right now, I have them just missing a playoff. Now, my best group of 5 team right now is Liberty. It's still kind of a toss-up, right? It could be UNLV. It could be Memphis. Who knows? Boise State could make a run again. They could win out and be that last team. But right now, Liberty, they have the most favorable schedule. App State was supposed to be their hardest opponent, and they just got absolutely whooped by Clemson. So who knows how good App State actually is now. And now Liberty's toughest matchup looks kind of easy. So if they can win out again, go 13-0, they should be a playoff bid. If they go 13-0 and they can't make the 12-team playoff, I don't know what's going to happen. I think that's just going to spark another conversation about, should we expand the playoff again to include all 10 teams? I don't know. I don't want to think about that, but I want to say that if they go undefeated, they should make the playoff. And I think right now, if I had to put a percentage on it, I think that Liberty has like a 50-50 shot at winning out the rest of the season. So if they can do that, I have them at number 12. The last at-large bid, I have Penn State. Penn State squeaked out a nail-biter with Bowling Green. Bowling Green! That being said, though, they only have 2 top 25 opponents on their schedule left with USC and Ohio State. So even if they lose those 2 games and win out the rest of them, they go 10-2, and that's a very strong case to make the playoff. Simple as that. Now, you could swap Missouri and Penn State. The more I look at it, the more I kind of want to do that. But right now I have Penn State at 11, Missouri at 13. Oregon at number 10 for the second week in a row. They have not given a strong case that they should be in the playoff. But Boise State is a much better team than Idaho, if I had to bet. But whatever it is that they're feeding those kids in Idaho, I don't know, man. Maybe there's some talent there that these other schools should be looking at. And Boise State's a really good group of 5 team. So with that being said, it's not the end of the world. Struggles early on in the season are going to happen. And as long as if you get that win, it's fine. But they've really got to figure out that offensive line. Dylan Gabriel got sacked 4 times this past week. They're just looking like Swiss cheese, man. And I don't really understand it because they're supposed to be this high-powered, strong, experienced offensive line. And they just aren't looking like that. So they've got to figure out something. At number 9, I have Alabama. Alabama, second year in a row. They were struggling with South Florida. I know the score seems pretty disproportionate, where if you're just looking at the scores, it's like, oh, Alabama beat South Florida. They were keeping it close until the 4th quarter. So it took them 3 quarters to realize, like, oh, wait, we're all 5-star recruits. We should just be steamrolling these guys. We should just be throwing it deep, showing our physical dominance. And that's what they did. And then they scored 4 touchdowns in the 4th quarter. The fact that it took them that long to figure that out is a little bit concerning. And it's also concerning because you can't do that once you enter SEC play. You can't just outrun your opponent, because these 5 stars from Alabama, they're going to be lining up against 5 stars from Georgia. So they've got to figure stuff out if they want to climb higher, hopefully win the SEC. But right now I still have them with an at-large bid, and I do think that they have the potential to climb higher. So I like them at 9 for now, but we'll see later on in the season if they're able to step it up a little bit and climb higher in the rankings. All right, at number 8, I have USC. At the beginning of the season, I think preseason, I didn't even have them in the top 25. I think I have them as an honorable mention because they lost Caleb Williams. I didn't really see how they were going to answer all the defensive woes, but they had that huge game against LSU week 1, and all the other teams in the Big Ten, besides Ohio State, have been struggling. So now it's like, oh, shoot, is Southern Cal the next best team in the Big Ten? They might be. And so I have them at 8 right now. We'll see if that comes back to bite me, but they just had an easy game against Utah State and one against LSU. And it's like, okay, well, maybe they're the real deal. So we'll see. But right now I have them in the conference championship game. That's my prediction right now. Number 7, I have Tennessee. To be honest, they made NC State look like a bunch of little kids. It's a little bit concerning for me because I can't keep going through that. I had high hopes for NC State and we look like crap, but let's focus on Tennessee for a second. Besides a couple miscues, Nico threw a couple interceptions. One of them was a pick 6. They were rocking and rolling on offense. I don't think anyone was surprised by that. But their defense was what really surprised me. They were absolutely smothering us. I mean, the second half, I think we only had 1 punt. And it wasn't because our offense was scoring. It was because we were turning it over that much. The defense was insane. That defensive line is extremely underrated. People talk so much about the offense at Tennessee, which is warranted, but their defense looked amazing. I don't know. Maybe it's just that SEC talent. They were just bigger and stronger and faster, and NC State is not a pushover team. They were top 25, so I don't know. I'm done talking about Tennessee. I don't want to dwell on that game anymore. I want to forget about that game. I want to have it erased from my memory. All right, moving on. Ole Miss we have at 6. They're rocking and rolling. They've just had a couple cupcakes right now, but they have so much talent there. They did amazing in the transfer portal. Basically all the same things that I was talking about in the preseason. So, yeah, I still have them at 6 now. I'm going to keep them there until they prove me wrong. Number 5. It's kind of a hot take. I have Georgia. I don't have Georgia winning the SEC this year. That's not any hate to Georgia. I still think that, honestly, if we're talking about just talent, just potential, I think Georgia's the best team in the SEC. But they also have one of the hardest schedules. They play Tennessee. They play at Alabama. They play at Texas. They play at Ole Miss. It's going to be pretty hard for them to win all of those games. So I have them at 5 now, but they're still a really, really good team. Really, the only thing holding Georgia back is their strength of schedule, is that their schedule is just super tough this year. So I have them down at 5, but I still think they have an extremely high ceiling. So I would not be surprised if they jump back to number 1 like I had them before. All right, number 4, I have Utah. They're the best team in the Big 12, in my opinion. They're currently the front runner. They played well against Baylor this past week, but like I was saying, it could be anyone's game. I think Oklahoma State, K-State, Arizona, Iowa State even. There's a lot of schools out there that could make a run. Miami is a little bit different, though, because I think it's Miami and then everyone else. I think it's still a huge race for second place in the ACC. By me, Miami just steamrolled Florida A&M. They're the only ACC team that looks like an absolute powerhouse. So I have them at 3. Number 2, I have Texas. I think that this is mostly because of their performance against Michigan. That can't be understated how well they played against Michigan. So I have them at 2 right now. But again, it could be anyone's game. There's a lot of talent in the SEC this year. That's why I kept Missouri out, because look at how many SEC teams I have right now. If I put Missouri in, that would be half of the playoff. But anyways, Texas at number 2. Number 1, we have Ohio State. No signs of weakness. I see them as the top dog right now. They have a favorable schedule. This might be their year. I know they've struggled the past couple of years, but I think that this might be their year. That's kind of my summary of my top 25 for this week. I don't know if I'll do this every week. Definitely let me know if you want me to do this every week, because this took a little bit amount of time, preparing for it, doing the research on. And so I want to do it if people want me to, but at the same time, I want to work on other projects that are maybe a little bit more important, if that's what y'all prefer me to do. So yeah, definitely give me feedback. Tell me what schools I should be looking at, which matchups I should be looking at. Who are some dark horses that you think should be in the top 25? Who are some group of 5 teams that you think can make a push for that playoff spot? I don't know. This year, it's going crazy, this week especially. I didn't even have Notre Dame in the top 25. They lose one game, and they're out of the playoff. There's no chance of them making the playoff this year. They could win out. They could go 11-1. Everyone's going to point at Northern Illinois. Lost to them. What the heck are you doing here? So, craziness. There's already 2 teams from the top 25 preseason that are out of it completely. So, this is nuts. I'm excited for this year. NC State still doesn't look good. I don't want to keep talking about it. We're just going to ignore NC State for now. But anyways, thanks for watching. Stay safe out there. I'll see ya. Peace.